Right off the coast of Putin's own palace, a Russian warship snapped in half. You heard that correctly. Ukraine tore apart an FSB vessel at its own pier. Not a simple sinking, but a hull split clean down the middle. And this wasn't just another strike. It was payback, 8 years in the making. Payback for what, you're wondering? Back in 2018, in the Kerch Strait, Russian forces intercepted 3 Ukrainian vessels, opened fire, and took 24 sailors captive. One of the ships involved in that operation was the Izumrud. 8 years later, that same vessel, anchored near the coastline tied to Putin's palace, was cut in two by a Ukrainian Sargon 3000 naval drone. Satellite imagery shows the bow and stern settled into the water at different angles, with scorch marks visible along the pier. Russia still hasn't acknowledged the strike days later, because acknowledging it means admitting Ukraine got past not just the ship's armor, but the radar coverage, surveillance net, and port security surrounding Gelendzhik entirely. Sit with that for a second. On the one stretch of coast where Putin is supposed to feel untouchable, a guard vessel gets blown apart. That's not just a lost ship, that's a serious wound. Before we dig into the details, a quick note. Some pro-Russian accounts have been flooding this channel's comments, trying to pressure us into backing off. We're going to keep covering what's actually happening on the ground. If this reporting matters to you, a like and an honest comment go a long way in getting it in front of more people. Thanks for that. Here's the thing. The Izumrud's whole job was spotting small maritime threats, guarding the coastline, and intercepting anything approaching the port. It couldn't even stop a drone from reaching its own mooring. Ukraine didn't just crack the hull, it walked straight through the entire security setup around Gelendzhik. On the coastline, Russia considered it safest. Picture it. An FSB vessel destroyed inside its own protected harbor. Ukraine's message to Moscow is blunt. Nowhere is safe. But sinking the ship wasn't even the real point. Here's the bigger issue. Russian warships had already abandoned Sevastopol for Novorossiysk and Gelendzhik to dodge Ukrainian strikes, betting their own shoreline was out of reach. Ukraine's answer was simple. You can run from Crimea, but you can't run from the Black Sea. Stay in Sevastopol, you get hit. Retreat to Novorossiysk, you get caught at the harbor mouth. Hide in Gelendzhik, you get torn apart within sight of Putin's palace. That's how direct the message is, and it scrambled every calculation Russia made about the Black Sea. Every port Moscow pulled its fleet back to, Ukraine found anyway. And it's not one ship. Ukraine claims 116 vessels struck in 9 days, 147 total. The latest round alone hit 5 oil tankers, a gas tanker, 3 dry cargo ships, and 2 tugboats. Not all of them sank. Some were damaged, some abandoned by their own crews. So is the goal to sink all 147? No, the goal is to choke Russia's transport network. A tanker with a wrecked engine, a ferry sitting idle for weeks, a tugboat that can't move. Each one is a broken link. Russia tried metal cages, netting, ropes around the tankers, but none of it stops drones, hunting with thermal cameras in the dark. Whatever defense Russia builds, the drones keep finding a way through. Now here's where it gets clever. Russia sends more tankers to fix Crimea's fuel shortage. Ukraine hits the tankers. Russia deploys FSB ships to guard them. Ukraine splits one in half at its own dock. Russia builds barriers at port entrances. Ships slow down there, creating a fresh cluster of stationary targets. Every fix Russia comes up with hands Ukraine an easier shot next time. It's a loop, and Ukraine has flipped it entirely against Russia. Each move Moscow makes just opens up a new target. Traffic through the Kerch Strait shows it clearly. On June 6th, more than 40 vessels sat waiting to pass through. By July 11th, only a handful remained. Ukraine didn't need to sink everything. It just made captains unwilling to sit still as easy targets for hours on end. Russia effectively lost control of a sea route it once considered locked down. Then the Donezlav Canal shut down, and suddenly the fighting reached the Caspian Sea. That canal was the link connecting Russia's river network and the Caspian to the Black Sea via the Sea of Azov. Now Russian cargo ships and the small Caspian military fleet are boxed into a landlocked sea with no way out, and Ukraine has even disrupted their movement there, using drones launched from the Black Sea. Think about that, a country shutting down the exit of an inland sea thousands of kilometers from its own coastline. That's where this war has gotten to. Roughly a quarter of Russia's grain exports moved through that route, so Moscow started rerouting cargo onto other ports and railways, meaning millions of extra tons piling onto rail lines already jammed with military supply runs. Ukraine's naval campaign is now squeezing Russia's land logistics too. Worse, that same corridor carried grain shipped out through the occupied ports of Berdyansk and Mariupol, so shutting Kerch traffic hit both Russia's legitimate exports and the trade it built through occupied territory. As the strikes piled up, European wheat prices jumped 7% in a single day, and U.S. wheat futures climbed 5%. What started as an explosion near Putin's palace rippled out to Russia's Caspian access and global grain prices within days. This isn't just a military win, it's an economic one. Now the part that matters most. While Ukraine strangled the sea routes, it also went after the refineries, producing the fuel meant for those tankers. A major fire tore through the Syzran refinery. The same night, 10 tankers and 4 ferries were hit elsewhere. Saratov's only crude processing unit was struck, halting the whole facility. Omsk, Russia's biggest gasoline producer, took drone hits despite sitting roughly 2,500 kilometers from Ukraine. The Kremlin now has to defend not just border-adjacent sites, but refineries deep in Siberia. With Omsk, Norsy, and Saratov offline, Russian gasoline output dropped to covering just 65% of summer demand, a daily shortfall of 40,000 to 45,000 tons. Lines formed at gas stations. In some areas, Cossack units were posted at the pumps to keep order, a striking sign of how deep this crisis runs inside Russia. The world's biggest oil producer, unable to keep its own citizens supplied with gas. So how did it try to cover the gap? This is where things got genuinely humiliating. Russia, which has sold India crude for years, had to turn around and ask India for refined gasoline instead. Rosneft, Gazprom Neft, and Lukoil all reached out to Indian refiners, who said they had no spare gasoline to offer. Still, a shipment of at least 42,000 tons left India, got transferred to another vessel off Egypt, and was routed toward Russia. Roughly 40% of Russian refining capacity may stay offline for at least 2 months, even without further strikes. Here's the trap Putin's stuck in. Damaged refineries force Russia to import more gasoline by sea, but the ships carrying it have to sail straight through Ukraine's strike zone. It's a cycle Russia built for itself, and it keeps tightening. While Russia scrambled to protect ships and refineries, Ukraine pivoted again, sending waves of drones straight at Moscow. Moscow's mayor, Sergei Sobyanin, said over 350 drones targeted the Moscow region in a single night. Russia's own defense ministry claimed 926 drones shot down nationwide in 24 hours. Whether that number holds up is a separate question, but even Russia's official figure shows the strain it's under. Stopping hundreds of incoming targets means radars, Pantsir units, and S-300 SES-400 batteries running for hours, costly interceptors firing off, and an entire capital on high alert. 4 major Moscow airports restricted flights, planes sat grounded, passengers were stuck waiting. Russia had to pause civilian air traffic just to defend its own capital, and that exposes Russia's real weak spot. Not every drone needs to reach its target. Even a swarm merely heading toward Moscow, forces Putin to pull air defenses away from the front line and other cities. A capital shutting down normal life just to intercept drones, that's not strength, that's desperation. Zelensky claimed Russia has repositioned roughly 90 S-400, S-500, and Pantsir systems to the Valdai region, near Putin's residence, with more redeployed around the Kerch Bridge. So the Kremlin is prioritizing the capital first, then Putin's own retreat, then Crimea's main gateway. But right as that's happening, the FSB ship in Gelendzhik gets hit, the oil terminal in St. Petersburg burns, and air bases in Crimea come under fire. Ukraine's message is straightforward. You can't defend everything at once. That's the core truth of this war now. Russia's enormous territory used to be its biggest asset. Ukraine has turned it into an impossible sprawl to protect. Every battery sent to Moscow leaves a gap somewhere on the front. Every radar shifted to Kerch leaves St. Petersburg thinner. Putin keeps having to choose what to sacrifice. It's not just missiles either. During drone waves, Russia throttles or cuts mobile internet entirely to disrupt Ukrainian navigation and data links. But that also knocks out taxis, payment systems, businesses, and everyday communication for its own people. So Ukraine sends drones, and the Kremlin ends up shutting down its own citizens' internet in response, disrupting daily life in the capital in the name of protecting it. One of the regime's clearest contradictions, making life harder for people while claiming to keep them safe. And that contradiction is chipping away at the regime's legitimacy in the eyes of ordinary Russians. As systems get pulled inward to shield Moscow, other fronts open up. Ukraine struck the oil terminal and port infrastructure around St. Petersburg, including the Kronstadt area, and hit the Vysotsk oil loading terminal on the Baltic too. So if Putin shifts shipments from the Black Sea to the Baltic, Ukraine just hits the northern routes instead. Protect Novorossiysk, and St. Petersburg is exposed. Send defenses to St. Petersburg, and pressure builds elsewhere near Moscow. It's a logistical nightmare with no clean exit. Every defensive move leaves something else undefended. It didn't stop there. Refineries in Yaroslavl and Kaluga got hit, along with the Dubna and Vladimir space communication centers near Moscow. Facilities, Ukraine says, help Russia's military gather satellite imagery and coordinate troop movements. So this isn't just about fuel anymore. It's about blinding Russia's eye in the sky, too. Three things keep a war machine running: fuel, communications, and intelligence. Ukraine is hitting all three at once. Refineries for fuel, communication hubs for coordination, satellite infrastructure for intelligence. This isn't a single strategy. It's an attempt to dismantle a whole system. That's really the shape of the 40-day campaign Ukraine kicked off on June 26th. It's not built around one massive blow. It's simultaneous pressure, long-range drones on refineries in major cities, medium-range strikes on trains and depots behind the front, naval drones on tankers and ferries. In just 1 week, Ukraine carried out 13 medium and long-range strikes, hitting the Saki and Gvardeyskoye air bases, aircraft and Shahed storage in Crimea, the St. Petersburg oil terminal, the Yaroslavl and Kaluga refineries, and the port of Vysotsk. This war isn't confined to one front anymore. It's playing out across air, land, and sea at once. And that's how Ukraine keeps the pressure coming from every direction. Ukraine's general staff says that by July 5th, 42.74% of Russia's refining capacity had gone offline. More than 60 storage tanks had been hit, and losses in the sector had reached $13.5 billion. That's Ukraine's own count, sure, but Russia, scrambling for Indian gasoline, its domestic output falling short, and gas station lines forming all back it up. The numbers aren't just propaganda footage. A country sitting on the world's largest oil reserves, unable to fuel itself, one of the sharper ironies of this war. Meanwhile, in Crimea, the other half of this campaign is playing out. 7 aircraft shelters at Saki Air Base were hit, with Ukraine claiming at least 7 warplanes destroyed or damaged. At Gvardeyskoye, 2 hangars storing Shahed drones and equipment were struck, alongside power stations, gas compressors, and air defense systems targeted the same night. Russia's own strike capability is getting hit before planes even leave the ground. A sign Ukraine isn't just defending anymore, it's reaching into Russia's ability to attack at all. But the most visible fallout in Crimea shows up on the streets, not the battlefield. Gasoline sales to the public got restricted first, then Sevastopol moved to QR code rationing, 1 fill-up per week. In some areas, gas prices climbed past 200 rubles a liter. Then came the blackouts. 2 hours of power, 6 hours out, according to local authorities. No power meant no water pumps, spoiled groceries in dead refrigerators, and businesses shutting their doors. Generators needed more fuel, but the tankers and ferries meant to deliver it were themselves getting hit. A fuel crisis became an electricity crisis, which became a water and daily life crisis. This might be Ukraine's most effective angle in Crimea, not just hitting military sites, but wearing down Russia's grip on the peninsula by breaking ordinary life there. For years, Putin sold Crimea as a symbol of victory and a vacation destination. Now, according to Russia's own travel industry union, about 70% of hotel bookings have been canceled. Last year, the peninsula reportedly hosted 6.9 million tourists. This year, it could lose more than 4 million of them. One Sevastopol hotel with over 300 rooms reportedly had just 15 guests show up for breakfast. Some resort hotels sat completely empty. Tourists started carrying spare fuel cans just to make it home. Putin's biggest propaganda showcase is now defined by empty hotels, dead pumps, and dark storefronts, proof that a war doesn't need to be lost militarily if the public's daily life is falling apart around it. The heaviest blow all this may deal the Kremlin, though, is financial. Russia's budget deficit hit 5.73 trillion rubles in the first half of the year, 1.7 times higher than the same stretch last year, and new government figures suggest the full year 2026 deficit could blow past the official target by over 1 trillion rubles. Federal spending is projected to climb to 45.11 trillion rubles, and the central bank flags the widening gap as a real inflation risk. Russia is losing oil and fuel revenue on one side while pouring more money into air defense, repairs, imported gasoline, and military costs on the other. Revenue shrinks while spending grows, the core contradiction of this war. Fighting it costs more money, but the fighting is also destroying the resources that generate that money. Right in the middle of this, Communist Party leader Gennady Zyuganov floated the idea that Russians and companies are sitting on 130 trillion rubles in savings, the equivalent of 3 state budgets, and suggested some of it could be redirected to the state. No formal decision has followed, and the head of the State Duma's Financial Markets Committee called the comment reckless. But what unnerves ordinary Russians isn't that a decision was made, it's that the idea is now being said out loud at all. First, gas got more expensive. Then tourism revenue dried up. Now people are wondering aloud whether their bank savings might get pulled into funding the war. The war isn't reaching Russians through television maps anymore. It's showing up at the gas pump, the power outlet, the state budget, and the bank account. That's the regime's real fear. Once people feel the war hitting their own lives directly, patience runs out fast. It's even bleeding into recruitment. The Institute for the Study of War's latest assessment says Russia's recruitment programs are struggling to keep pace with mounting losses, and Moscow is paying steeper and steeper costs for marginal battlefield gains. That makes pulling air defenses off the front even riskier. Russia can't endlessly replace hardware, and it can't endlessly replace people either. as modern systems get diverted inland to shield Moscow and Putin's residences, frontline coverage likely thins out. That doesn't mean the front is defenseless, but fewer S-300s and S-400s there could open more windows for Ukraine's HIMARS, medium-range drones and aircraft. And while these systems are in transit, their radars are off, their launchers aren't combat-ready, and they're moving on fixed roads by truck or rail. Instead of hunting for an active S-400, Ukraine can just wait and strike the convoy. Every time Putin pulls a system back to guard Moscow, he opens a gap on the front and turns the relocation itself into a target. Even Russian nationalist commentators have started criticizing the Kremlin for never building a real nationwide air defense network. Putin keeps telling the public the war is going according to plan. Meanwhile, Russians are watching drone swarms over their own cities, shuttered airports, gas lines, and blackouts. Victory announcements are getting drowned out by footage of fires. With State Duma elections coming in September, the last thing the Kremlin wants is for the war to become part of everyday life in Moscow and St. Petersburg, because elections measure public patience, and if people are exhausted by the war, it'll show at the ballot box. Ukraine isn't trying to topple Russia overnight. It's running 3 clocks against Putin simultaneously. The strike clock: Ukraine is hitting new targets faster than Russia can repair the old ones. The money clock: every new defense measure, import, and repair adds to the deficit. And the patience clock: the longer this drags on, the more Russians pay while getting less security in return. Putin can't stop all three at once. Protect the ships, and refineries stay exposed. Protect the cities, and the front weakens. Protect the budget, and imports and repairs get cut. Try to hide the war from the public, and hundreds of drones show up over Moscow anyway. Ukraine's advantage here doesn't require a bigger navy or more oil than Russia has. It just needs to keep generating new crises faster than Putin can put them out. And as long as that pace holds, Russia's massive territory stops being a shield and turns into an endless list of things it has to defend. So putting it all together, what do you think is the most dangerous development for Putin here? The FSB ship destroyed within sight of his own palace? The Kerch Strait closure trapping Russia's fleet in the Caspian? Refineries like Syzran, Saratov, and Omsk going dark? Or the fuel lines, blackouts, and empty hotels across Crimea? Maybe it's the growing budget deficit and the open talk of touching Russians' 130 trillion rubles in savings to fund the war. Either way, Ukraine is hitting Russia on 3 fronts at once: military, economic, and psychological. And on all 3, Russia keeps getting pushed back. Which of these do you think Russia actually has a shot at containing? Does pulling air defenses back to Moscow, or the fuel and power crises unfolding in Crimea, expose the deeper weakness here? Is this all pointing towards something Russia can't recover from? Drop your take in the comments, hit like, and subscribe if you want more of this kind of breakdown. We'll keep tracking this as it develops. Take care.